What's up, guys? It's me, Lumos Theramax, aka Renadom, and I've spent a lot of time in the last few, honestly, just months in a in a comic book version of a hyperbolic time chamber, just leveling up, trying to get everything I possibly can to make a variety of new videos for you guys. And I'm looking forward to getting back in the groove of making some vids, having been away for a little while. But I'm going to be dropping a ton of Lantern content in the future, so I'll need to be referencing a few things about them. And I'm going to have to cover a few different topics to kind of really explain how dangerous and how powerful these characters are. So definitely keep an eye out, hit the like button below, make sure you subscribe, and with no further ado, let's pop off. So today's topic is the emotional spectrum from DC Comics, and it's something that has been heavily invested into ever since Jeff Johns, back in 2004-2005's GL Rebirth, kind of made big changes with like the entire Lanternscape in general. Let's just start off with some small like common knowledge things about about like the verse, and then kind of work our way up. So emotions in DC are conceptual in nature, meaning they're not bound by any singular dimension or realm. If you look at the map of the multiverse, you get an idea of just how crazy this gets, all the way out to the edge where you find the source wall. And the source wall, pretty much nothing can pass it. I mean, very few exceptions can pass the source wall with how immensely powerful it is. Pretty much everybody who gets anywhere near it just gets stuck to it forever, and they can't really pass it. I can think like maybe 10 characters who's ever done it, and in the context of how long DC's been around, it's pretty impressive. Emotions are actually on both sides, indicating they scale past it or have something to do with it, and that's really important to consider. There's reservoirs of emotional energy inside it that actually feed the actual concepts in the universe. So cosmologically in DC, just to give you a general idea, like this is where we're already talking. We're already talking the furthest side of our home verse within the greater omniverse, which is everything within the source wall, and even in the source wall itself. So to kind of put this home, let's go back to before there was a time where there was a source wall. Way back in the origin for the main continuity of DC's multiverse, the Cosmic Raptor, this insanely powerful being, one-shots the super celestial Perpetua, who essentially was trying to create, who had created our verse, but she created it with evil crisis energies. So the Cosmic Raptor basically recreated our verse with anti-crisis energies, which are also called the Seven Forces of Creation. Okay, so the Seven Forces of Creation were born of the Source, and the Cosmic Raptor molded them in place of Perpetua, or like another super celestial. One of the Seven Forces, the most significant one we'll be discussing today, is the concept of something called the emotional spectrum, or emotion itself. The first-born emotion and the purest emotion was the white light of life, whose name was the Traveler, aka the White Entity. Entering our verse, the light of the Traveler upset the darkness itself in the form of Necron, the Void. Because for the first 700 years the entity was in our verse, it illuminated everything. It was blinding. There was no absence of light. The Traveler eventually settled in our reality. It made its way all the way to Earth, and this is where things get wild. The White Entity buried itself in Earth with a seal so no one could harm it. However, just being around planet Earth caused life to happen for our entire verse. The White Entity of life is connected to everything that has emotion, for emotion is life, and life is light in the verse. With life rising up on Earth, the beings that were bestowed life began to intensely feel fragments of the white light of life, and it transformed them into emotional entities. Each entity represented one of the minor emotions that currently exists within the white light of life and is associated with one color on the color spectrum. The Butcher was rage and was red. Ophidian was greed and was orange. Parallax was fear and was yellow. Ion was will and green. Adara was hope in blue, and proselyte was compassion in indigo. The predator was love in sapphire. Collectively, including the white light, they form the entire emotional spectrum and its concept. No longer being bound by one planet with their newfound power, these new entities left the planet and began roaming around the verse. They affected the entire verse, causing beings to draw on them as a concept and as a result spread life and emotion. This fed these emotional entities and made the entity stronger individually, and as a result, the life entity grew stronger too. As time went on, beings who drew on emotions became aware of emotions as a concept, and the most notable race who had done so was the Malthusians, or Owens as they're most commonly called nowadays, the Guardians of the Universe. In unison with a traveler from outside our time-space known as Volthoom, they unlocked the hidden potential of using the emotional spectrum as a weapon by removing emotion from themselves and placing their emotion into Volthoom, fundamentally changing him. Volthoom had a direct access into the emotional spectrum itself and became a terror that threatened the entire verse. Volthoom was eventually sealed away by using Volthoom's own tech against him and creating the first Green Lantern rings out of them out of desperation by the Guardians. Later on, the lanterns that were chosen by those rings eventually were able to overcome Volthoom by convincing him that he was actually wrong. However, the Guardians immediately sealed him away at his first sign of weakness. The damage had been done, however. The Guardians began to understand how dangerous the emotional spectrum was, especially in their emotional states. They began their attempts to deal with emotions and eventually the concept of the emotional spectrum as a whole, because it was something they perceived as toxic. They began creating an army that did not have emotions because they thought the best way to deal with emotions was create an army of robots called manhunters. But eventually they realized that they couldn't actually tamper with the entities, because to tamper with the entities was to tamper with reality itself. The emotion, and then on top of that, the emotional entities all dispersed or were captured by the Guardians. And these Guardian guys I wouldn't underestimate. They're very crazy beings. And from what I understand, the Guardians for sure captured Ophidian, Ion, and Parallax. I also want to say, in all honesty, that the Zamarons also captured the Predator too, and the Zamarons are an offshoot of the Guardians. But this is important. These guys essentially could only be captured. You cannot actually kill or dispose of them because you would be destroying that concept in reality. Hence, the tampering with them tampers with reality itself. The Guardians at one point in time come to the realization that the white entity or the Traveler is a very significant thing. And obviously its purpose, its function. Because after spending some time digging around with all these concepts, eventually led to them, they found out about essentially all of life coming directly from it and decided the most important thing they could possibly do is protect all of life by protecting it. Because even though they were definitely lacking in most emotions at this point in time, they still had a tie to life. They weren't completely void of those emotions, at least not yet. They began claiming that their homeworld, the Guardians' homeworld, planet Maltus, was the origins to all of life in the verse to keep planet Earth and the life entity safe. This could explain a lot of things about Earth, hence its heroes, hence its variety of lanterns specifically, because we have a ton of lanterns on it, not just green lanterns. It's a huge draw for multiversal level problems and things along those lines. So the Guardians tried to hide its significance by claiming their own, essentially. However, for these entities, even being captured, they still existed, and as a result, emotions continued. However, something that was mentioned before was the black void that was here before the white entity or the Traveler came into our existence. That darkness was known as Necron, the Lord of the Unliving, and he hated the light, and by extension, the emotional spectrum. He sought to end it any way he could because it disturbed his slumber in the darkness. Necron is something else. I'm not sure I would equate him to exactly being an emotional entity, because ironically enough, later on, I believe it is Scar who refers to Black Hand as an emotional entity. Uh, Necron is just his own kind of thing, but keep in mind, technically, without Necron in our plane, Black Hand is the entity of death itself. But back to the entire emotional spectrum, it has a variety of properties outside of just being a concept for life itself. Each hue of the spectrum has features and abilities unique to its variation in color. For example, the emotion of life can grant and take life, as well as be connected to every living being with its hacks. The emotion of rage can vomit a violent energy that can consume anything and infect other emotions with its hacks. The emotion of greed can take and steal identities with its hacks. The emotion of fear can manipulate and terrorize others. The emotion of will can allow you to overcome with perseverance hacks, and has the concept of emerald space. The emotion of hope can heal, inspire, and empower those around them. The emotion of compassion can channel energy of other emotions, teleport around, and use mind hacks against people. And the emotion of love can connect, entice, and protect others, as well as themselves. And that's unique because all of those things, all of those are unique properties that kind of separate them from everything that was here before. And way back when, this Mad Guardian Krona looked back at the origins of the verse and saw a lantern ring on the hand of the Super Celestial that made the verse. And as a result, assumed emotions were the ultimate power in the verse. After all, from his perception, he looked and saw that the creator God that everyone idolized was using emotion. So why not take its idea and then use that to get to its level to further enlighten yourself? That was the idea of Krona. And he was banished and hunted by his fellow guardians as a result of these ideas, I guess, more so than anything. And as a result of that, he actually missed the emotional terror known as Volthoom. And unlike the other guardians, he never gave up his emotions and watched them all grow into cold, calculated, non-emotional beings. And this was reflected in their army of robot manhunters. So, in response to them and in defense of himself, he began to weaponize the emotional spectrum, specifically the most pure and the least corruptible emotion at the center of the spectrum. And keep in mind, the spectrum is tied to the color spectrum, Roy G. Biv, which is the analogy. So you got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. So the closer you are to the center, the less the emotions have control on you, is essentially the thought he had. He crafted a gauntlet that could tap directly into the green emotional spectrum and deal with some of the manhunters, use it as a weapon. Eventually, Krona hacked into the manhunters and used the manhunters' programs against them to show why having an army of robots as an attack force was a bad thing. And the manhunters inadvertently went on a killing spree across the cosmos beyond what even the Guardians could stop. So, looking at their enemy and their former allies, the Guardians began to believe that maybe they should reconsider emotions as weapons, much like Krona used in his gauntlet, or the original Green Lanterns that fought Volthoom, but with less power. They couldn't trust them with that much power. They couldn't use these weapons themselves, as they lost their emotions back in the day, but decided to recruit beings from across the verse to help. And back to those emotional reservoirs that exist past the source wall. Something really interesting about them is they are tied to the entities themselves, and as a matter of fact, the reason why the majority of the entities outside of Parallax actually are no longer around. There are emotional reservoirs within the source wall itself that feed the universe. They're not concepts feeding us individually, they're quite literally feeding the source wall itself. And if the source wall isn't fed those energies, it can't maintain itself, and it breaks down and actually is destroyed. When the source wall is destroyed in this way, everything on the inside is completely obliterated, which is how this villain essentially wound up getting here. It's weird. He got trapped in a cosmic egg and managed to make it into our reality from the former one. And in his verse, they were all lanterns. They had ascended to a point in time where every single person could embrace emotions and utilize them effectively. But the problem was they drained the emotional reservoirs, which led to the calamity that had happened before. And it was actually Kyle who dragged all the emotional entities chose Kyle as a host, and he, along with them, all went into the source wall and basically wrote away there being a problem with the emotional spectrum, with the use of with the life equation, as a matter of fact. But outside of that, I'm thinking that this might actually conclude our general conversation on the emotional spectrum. I wish there was a lot more content out there, and I'll be doing a few videos on each individual light as well as the core that's associated with them specifically. But right now, I just wanted one solid video on the concept of it in general, like a broad way of having a video to just point someone and be like, hey, here's like the idea of the emotional spectrum. Well, it's been good, guys. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for listening to me rattle on about some really cool concepts in DC. And if you have any further questions, leave them down below, or any suggestions of something that maybe I should have added to this. I've got a massive file compilation I'm trying to get together, and so anything and everything will help. Also, I'd like to point out the fact that recently I have actually been included in a group called Coffee Shop, as well as, of course, the Villain High Council. And it's going to be a series of really trusted YouTubers that I've worked together with for a long period of time, all kind of working together to benefit each other as well as everyone, and just promote really good content. So if you guys like everything that I do, definitely hit up, the rest of these guys. They're all really solid. Your favorite villain. We've also got, let's see, Captain Forrest on there. We've got NoLuck on here, we got Kua on here, we've got Q on here, and we've got Jobber. I mean, like I said, all these guys are personal friends of mine. They all do really well at everything they do, and give them a shot, man. They're awesome. But until next time, guys, definitely check the link in the description, like, subscribe, and check out that group of friends of mine, the Coffee Shop, man. Thanks. Later, Lanterns.